Hey, what's up, people? Welcome to my review for Mad Max Fury Road. Now, this film literally is the exact definition of a film that is non-stop action. This movie is truly one of the greatest action films ever created. And you hear that from a lot of people who love this film, that this is possibly one of the greatest action films of all time. And for me, so is Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. So for me, it could be Mad Max, The Road Warrior is the greatest action film of all time, and this would be the second greatest action film of all time. It's that good. And what I love about this movie is that it is a true return to form. After the misstep that was Thunderdome, George Miller comes back 30 years later and just nails it. He hits it out of the park, right? Not only does he hit it out the park, he takes what he did in The Road Warrior and multiplies it times 100. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about those epic car chase sequences with muscle cars and just non-stop action. And then he takes what he did in Thunderdome with the world building, the epic costumes, the epic set designs, and you get the best of both worlds. And it truly is a spectacular film. Like, when I saw this movie in the theater, I was blown away. I was blown away not only by the return to form, basically just giving me back what I felt when I saw The Road Warrior, but with the application of modern filmmaking techniques. Like, you see that George Miller brought something new to the table as far as filmmaking techniques. And what I love about this film is that a lot of the action sequences are real, right? There's some CGI in there, and we're going to get to that, but for the most part, these are real stunts, and that is a trademark of the Mad Max franchise, going back to the original low-budget independent film. This film is a movie about, it kind of reminds me of Terminator 1 and 2. How there is no fate but what we make it. That's what those films touch upon. But so does this film in a way, because near the beginning of the third act of this film, you see Furiosa she feels hopeless, right? She tried to go to the green place and it doesn't exist, and now she's just basically going to trek into the desert and just have no destination and hope that they come across something, that they come across some water or just some kind of resources so they can live, right? But Max says not to trust the hope. You know, that hope is basically, it's nothing without action. And then he convinces her to retake the Citadel, right? And for me, the message of this film is that hope is nothing without action, right? That's one message of the film. There's numerous, right? I love that this Mad Max film is the first Mad Max movie that is an ensemble piece, right? And typically, Max is kind of like a character out of a Western or like out of a samurai film. And it's no different here. However, this film kind of takes the good, the bad, and the ugly approach, where instead of having one main character, we kind of have three. Now, in this film, we have Max's character, Furiosa, and Nicholas Holt's character. So that gives us three characters. And like I said, this kind of reminds me of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right? And I thought this was kind of refreshing. And to the people out there that have criticisms toward this movie as far as Max being outshined by Furiosa, I completely disagree. I think Max and Furiosa were an excellent team. I don't think neither one outshines the other. It was a perfect unison. They worked together hand in hand, and I thought it was great. I truly do, right? And I am not even the slightest fan of Charlize Theron's acting at all. I don't think she's that great of an actor, but she did an outstanding job in this film. Charlize Theron, she really did. You know, I have to concede she did an excellent job, and you know, I have no criticisms for her acting or how she portrayed her character. But in regards to Tom Hardy as Max, you know, Tom Hardy, there were moments when I was watching Tom Hardy's performance, and it really reminded me of Mel Gibson's version of Mad Max. And those moments were when he would emote, when he had no dialogue, right? Like, there was moments where I was like, oh wow, like he really channeled Mel Gibson's depiction of Max. The issue that I have when I have it, right, and it's not too often, but the only time that I feel like Tom Hardy is a little off is when he speaks. I don't know why George Miller directed Tom Hardy to speak with that voice, right? Because that voice to me was unnecessary. Mel Gibson never talked like this. He never talked like that. He just talked normal. He talked normal. And I think that's what Tom Hardy should have done. Like, I think maybe he was trying to make his character seem like hardened and gritty, but the voice was unnecessary. The only thing, it had the opposite effect for me. Instead of it making him seem kind of like hardened, it just became a little forced and a little contrived, and at times it was kind of difficult to hear him or to understand what he was saying, and there were moments in the film where I was like, why is he talking like that? Like, you know, Mel Gibson never talked like that as Max. Remember his depictions when he was like, you got to get through me, you know, if you want to get there, you got to get through me. He just talked normal. So I don't know why Tom Hardy just wasn't directed to talk normally. And that's literally the only criticisms that I have for Tom Hardy's depiction. I think other than that, he did a very decent job. Love his facial expressions, the way he emotes. He was great with the action. Nicholas Holt's character, on the other hand, you know, I was on board halfway through the film, right? I thought it was interesting. I'm like, wow, look, we have this kind of like subplot involving this character who is a devoted follower of Immortan Joe, and at that moment when he failed and just felt humiliated, I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. But what made it take a nosedive, in my opinion, is the way how the brides just started treating him. They trusted him way too soon, right? If you think about all the distrust that they conveyed and that they showed to Max at the beginning, right? I expected that towards Nicholas Holt's character like times 10, because he was actually a devoted follower of Immortan Joe, whereas Max, they could tell just from him wearing that thing on his face that he was basically a slave, right? Or something, like a captive. So why are they basically treating Nicholas Holt's character with so much affection, like that one bride that was stroking his lips because he was sad? And then, to me, like, when I saw that, I was like, ah, oh, come on, man. Like, you really expect me to, like, buy this? Like, it could have worked if they just gave it 10 more minutes, right? Show scenes where they're like, no, we got to get rid of this dude. He's a devoted follower of Immortan Joe. We should kill him right now. And then let him do something to convey to the brides and to Furiosa that he can be trusted. But I really feel like they trusted him way too early. And then when he sacrificed himself at the end so that Max and the brides can get away and Furiosa could get away, I just didn't buy it. I was just like, oh, so this is what they were trying to go for, but it didn't work because they trusted him too soon. And that criticism right there is literally the number one thing that I disliked about this movie, right? Literally, right? That's the only real criticism that I have. I have a couple of nitpicks though. I'm not a big fan of the cinematography and the color of this movie. I think the colors are way too oversaturated. Therefore, I prefer the black and chrome edition of this film, which is just outstanding. You watch this film in black and white, and the suspension of disbelief is just there, right? But if I see the theatrical cut and it's just super colorful, it feels CGI-ish, even though they were using real stunts and stuff. And I can use that, the same example for like Star Wars Episode 2 and to a lesser extent Episode 3, right? Like, it's like sometimes the color saturation, even though, like, for instance, in Attack of the Clones, they use models, they use practical effects, but a lot of people are like, it's CGI trash, but it really isn't. But it just looks like that because of the cinematography and some of the digital compositing. And I kind of felt like that a little bit here with this movie. I mean, it's not as bad as I would say as Attack of the Clones. Like, in fact, it's nowhere near as bad. And again, this is just a nitpick. The theatrical cut is outstanding, right? I'm just telling you a preference. I prefer the black and chrome edition. That's all I'm saying. Because when I see the black and chrome edition and the contrast of the blacks and the whites, it's just gorgeous to look like. Even George Miller said he prefers that version over the theatrical cut. One more little nitpick that I have for this film is the one sequence where I thought the CGI was just kind of like ridiculous was the sandstorm sequence. And it wasn't the entire sandstorm sequence. That was intense, that was exciting. But it was the scene where Max and Nicholas Holt's character get like, and their vehicle get like thrown and explode through the sandstorm, and you see their bodies just flying everywhere like cartoons, and it just looked ridiculous to me. I mean, in real life, you would have been murdered. Your body would have been ripped in half. Your head would have been over there. Your leg would have been over there. Your arm would have been over there. And then they just wake up in the desert all in one piece and barely a scratch on them. That was literally the only like anti-CGI sentiment that I have for this entire film. But as a whole, like I said, this film is just basically 1.5 hours of just chase and action, and it's just relentless and non-stop, and it's exciting. And another thing is that this movie is like insane, but in a good way. Like, the world building is just remarkable. Like, the way that they were able to come up with all these concepts, like this religion for Immortan Joe, using like Valhalla and all that stuff, and just all these things that they invented for this franchise, for this for the world building here. It's remarkable. It really is. It's like something out of like Star Wars or Star Trek, as far as like the world building and how it really works, right? You really feel like this universe exists somewhere, and that it has rules, right? And it has a certain history behind it, right? They did an outstanding job, and like the costumes were insane and super inventive and genius. Like it was remarkable, right? And again, it's like George Miller was like, oh, for you fans that miss that Road Warrior stuff, here you go, times 100. You know, I'm back, and that's truly how the execution feels here. And one thing that I really loved about this movie is that Max continues to be compassionate, right? And in fact, it really feels like that's all Max has to live for, is to be compassionate, because he's literally living in hell, right? And if he doesn't live for helping others, then there's nothing to live for, right? Otherwise, he's just a scavenger and a worm, just like everybody else, terrorizing and stealing and robbing and raping. So he lives to help others. And at the same time, he's simultaneously being haunted by these sentiments that he couldn't help everybody, right? And I really love that moment between Max and Furiosa, where he finally tells her his name, right? Because initially he was like, what does it matter? Right? He's untrusting and he has to be hard. And this continues the sentiment and trend from the previous movies, where it's like he has to be tough, he has to be hard, right? Like, what do you want? Right? But deep down inside, he cares, right? And that moment when he told Furiosa and the brides his name, that was just beautiful. That was a beautiful moment, because now he's showing his true self. And by then they already know, because Max was willing to sacrifice himself to help these strangers that he didn't know. Similar to the hero in a Western or in a samurai film. Now, this leads me to a question, and I ask myself whether this film is a sequel or a reboot, right? And the reason why I ask myself that is because there's moments in the film where Max is having these flashbacks about the people he let down. And you see a moment where there's a little girl and she basically calls Max Pa, right? Her father. And I do not recall Max having a young daughter in any of the films, right? And so I can conclude two things. Either he had a second family that took place between Thunderdome and Fury Road, or this is a reboot. Now, I want to believe that this is a sequel, right? Because I'm not a fan of reboots. Unless you're going to completely start from scratch, new director, new everything, right? But here it's George Miller, and I want him to continue building on what came before. So that being said, I hope that Max did have a family again, and maybe he did have a daughter, and maybe they died too, and that would just be even more devastating than losing his wife and child in the first film. I mean, it happened again, and then you also see flashbacks of Max with other people that he let down, and again, it's truly interesting to see this character torn. I mean, he's a compassionate hero, and he's torn because he couldn't save everybody, and the reason why is because that's all there is to live for in this world, to help others. And I want to believe that Max discovered that in The Road Warrior, right? And he continued that lifestyle, and that this is a sequel and not a reboot. Now, I just have to say, I thought it was great to see the V8 Interceptor come back, even though it was destroyed in The Road Warrior. I don't know how he came across another V8 Interceptor or whether this is a reboot, but you know, I don't care. And yes, I know Max barely drove the V8 Interceptor in Fury Road. It was mostly driven by villains, but it was just remarkable to see again. And I'm just glad that they brought it back, because every time it was on screen, I just wanted to cheer. And yes, I saw it get destroyed again, and it hurt. But nevertheless, to see the V8 Interceptor come back 30 years later was amazing. Fury Road is a great film. This is how you do a sequel 30 years later, right? So, you hear that, Disney Star Wars? That's how you do it, right? You do it like this. You pay respects to what came before. You don't put an agenda in there. You just tell a good story with good characters and deliver on the goods. Deliver on the action. Give the audience what they want, which is the trademark of the series. You give, like in the instance of Mad Max, you give them epic car chases with muscle cars times 10. I mean, this went beyond muscle cars. We had monster trucks and all types of stuff, right? I mean, this movie was insane, right? And I truly love this film. And I don't subscribe to the notion that Furiosa outshined Max in any way. They worked together hand in hand. They did an outstanding job. This is an ensemble piece, and maybe that's what's jarring to the people that feel like Furiosa may have outshined Max. But to me, this is an ensemble piece. It's like watching the Fistful of Dollars trilogy. You have Fistful of Dollars 1 and 2, which is mainly Clint Eastwood's character, and then the third one, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Now there's three main characters. Hey, but that's okay, because that was the best one anyway. So I have no problem with Furiosa. Did not feel like she outshined Max in any way. I don't feel like this movie is woke. Now look, I hate woke stuff like any other normal, decent person, but to me this movie was not woke. If you think helping women escape sexual slavery is woke, then you're projecting, man. You got problems, right? This movie was not woke. Max, he beat Furiosa fair and square when they had their fight. So and he helped her, right? He saved her life essentially. So I don't understand those people that think this is some kind of like anti-patriarchy stuff, because it's not, and I think your critique is absolute nonsense, right? So I just had to throw that in there because there's a small segment of the negative criticisms out there that are that subscribe to those sentiments, and I don't, right? So Mad Max Fury Road truly is an outstanding film, a return to form for those who were disappointed by Thunderdome. This is like the Road Warrior times 100. Truly an epic film, and I highly recommend it. So let's get started with this in-depth analysis of Fury Road.
Now, as soon as this film begins, we're off to a great start. I mean, the movie just totally wins me over as soon as I see Max standing there with the V8 Interceptor. I mean, I smiled with glee when I initially saw this for the first time, and I said to myself, yes, this is the way you bring back Mad Max after 30 years. And then we just hit the ground running with him being chased by Immortan Joe's gang, and then he gets captured. And from the very beginning, this film is just super intense, and you know that we are in for a thrill ride. So Max, unfortunately, gets his V8 Interceptor taken from him, and the enemy basically just amps it up, right? And I love how throughout the film, Max is just constantly saying, "That's mine," every time he sees the enemy driving his V8 Interceptor. And yeah, while it's a little disappointing that Max never got in the thing and never got his ride back before it got destroyed, like I said in the introduction, I was just happy to see the V8 Interceptor return. I just love this damn car, right? And from the very beginning of this film, we see just how overwhelmingly epic the set designs and the costumes are. And it's like we just continue building on what Thunderdome did with this film. So what I love about this franchise is that each subsequent film just gets more epic. Maybe Thunderdome wasn't as epic as Road Warrior as far as action, but it was way more epic as far as set design and costumes and just the scale of the film, right? The shots, we got to see the terrain of the wasteland. Well, this film continues building off what Thunderdome did. So now shots are way more epic. There's way more larger scale as far as set design and costumes, and I really appreciate it, right? And we see that Max is being haunted of visions or memories of all the people he failed to save. One of these individuals being a daughter of some sort because they call him Pa. So I want to think that Max had another family between Thunderdome and this film, right? Max tries to escape from Immortan Joe's henchmen, but he's captured again. And I can't tell you how great it is to see the return of Hugh Byrne in the Mad Max series, who was the original villain in the original 1979 Mad Max. He played Toe Cutter, and here he is returning 35 years later as the villain Immortan Joe. I thought that was epic and a true nod to the Mad Max fans, and I really appreciate it. So again, right from the very beginning, we got the V8 Interceptor returning and Hugh Byrne returning. I mean, this is amazing stuff. And you could see the goodwill that's being extended to the fans by George Miller. And not only that, right from the very beginning, we're getting the epic car chases that we're missing from Thunderdome. So already, I'm just smiling like a little kid in a candy store, man. And like I said, the scale of this film is just epic. And the introduction of Charlize Theron's character, Furiosa, was really good. Her character is a great character. Right? And even though I'd rather see a different kind of movie than the origin story they have planned for her in her own film, I mean, hey, man, I can't really be that upset about this because her character was great, right? She did a fantastic job, and like I said, there was no outshining of Mad Max. They worked well together. They were in total synchronicity, and I love that this film was somewhat of an ensemble cast, like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And right from the very beginning, we see the stranglehold that Immortan Joe has on this colony or town or what settlement or whatever you want to call it. How he just basically holds the citizens hostage, right? I mean, he just gives them barely enough water to survive. And that line he delivers saying, "Don't get addicted to water because you will resent its absence." I just thought that was just like pure genius writing, and at the same time it conveys just how evil and diabolical this guy really is. And then after this, the plot gets going right away once Immortan Joe realizes that Furiosa has stolen his brides in an attempt to liberate them. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about Fury Road. We're given a simpler plot than what we were given in Thunderdome, right? Thunderdome tried to be different. It tried to be something else, right? The other Mad Max films, for the most part, are kind of like chase films, right? And then Thunderdome tried to give us something different, which I can appreciate in theory. However, here in Fury Road, I really appreciate the simplicity of the plot line, right? Because this just gives us more opportunities for epic action, and that's exactly what happens as soon as Immortan Joe realizes that Furiosa took his girls. The chase begins, and he's going after her to get his brides back. And during the chaos of getting his army to go after Furiosa, Mad Max is basically being used as he's being used as a walking blood bank, right, for Nicholas Holt's character. And I thought that was creative also. And this movie's just filled with so much crazy concepts, right? So you got Mad Max just basically being this guy's blood bank, right? And I thought that was crazy. And he's just confined to the grill of this car. And here we go with this epic car chase, and we're getting all types of epic action. And once Immortan Joe's entourage that's basically accompanying Furiosa realizes that she's basically going against the leader's orders, this is when the true battle on wheels begins, and it does not disappoint. I mean, you're just basically watching this with your jaw dropping, especially at all the epic action sequences. And I love the fact that that George Miller used real cars. You got real stunts, you got real explosions. I mean, sure, CGI was used, but it was used minimally, and I really appreciate that, especially during this day and age. And like I said during the introduction to this review, the only CGI-ish issue I have is when the sandstorm hits, and some of the physics, like when Max gets thrown around with the Nicholas Hoult character, it just looks like a cartoon, and it just looks like they should have just been ripped apart during that Desert Storm explosion, and it just looked really phony. But other than that, everything else is pretty spectacular. Everything looks pretty good, pretty believable, and again, high octane action. Of course, the sandstorm itself was CGI. I mean, what else are they going to do, right? But even if you just sit back and look at the scale of that sandstorm, I mean, it's massive. And it just makes me really want that movie that shows what happened, what caused the apocalypse, or not what caused it, but just I want to see it, right? And I've been saying this in the previous Mad Max reviews. I want to see a Mad Max movie where Max experiences the apocalypse. So essentially, I want to see a movie that takes place between Mad Max 1 and Mad Max 2. I think that would be amazing. And I'm going to continue lobbying for that. So Max survives this crash in the sandstorm, and this is where he teams up with Furiosa. And I have to say, the chemistry between Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron was really good, right? And I love the fight that they have, and I love the fact that Mad Max wins, right? This is Mad Max movie. He does not get outshined by her at all, right? However, she's able to hold her own. She almost beat him, and you could definitely see that she has what it takes to beat him, right? She is a survivor. She is a warrior, and it's in full display in this action scene right here between her and Max. And another thing, this scene is also all about distrust, right? And we can see right away that it's gonna take a while for Furiosa and these brides to trust Max. And no, it's not because he's a man. It's because these women were in sexual slavery, and everybody that Immortan Joe surrounded himself with views him as some kind of deity, right? As a god, right? So I don't see this whole like anti-male thing that some of these opponents to this film be saying, right? And I mean, and that's only natural. I mean, this is an environment where every person is out for themselves and no one can be trusted. I mean, Max isn't trusting them either, right? But because Immortan Joe has no mercy for anybody, they're forced to team up with one another. And the Nicholas Hoult character tries to tag along under the presumption that basically Max is going to like try to side with Immortan Joe in order to get in his good graces, but he's severely wrong. And you also have to remember that just during the sandstorm sequence, these guys were not friends, right? They tried to kill each other. And now all of a sudden this Nicholas Hoult character, he wants to, act like they're buddies, but Max knows better than that, right? So ultimately what happens is they leave this dude behind, and for good reason, and it was a wise choice. And again, throughout the duration of this sequence, you could see that Max and Furiosa don't trust each other, but it's a slow, gradual, subtle transition to them trusting one another. And that's what I love about this movie. You see that there's this slow transitioning of them forging this bond and this friendship, and that they trust each other. It doesn't happen right away. It really, they both have to prove to one another, right? And I think that Charlize Theron, I think Furiosa, she's very, very blown away by the way that Max is willing to sacrifice himself for her and the brides, right? I don't think Max is kind of surprised or impressed too much by Furiosa as far as how she's willing to go out on a limb, because he's more willing to go out on a limb for her than vice versa. Now, that's not to say that I think that Furiosa is a coward or anything. I just think that her objective is to save these brides, right? And get to the green place, right? Whereas Max, he wants to survive, but he is not forgetting his purpose, which is to help others, right? His humanity. He has to hold on to his humanity in this wasteland, apocalyptic environment. Otherwise, he just becomes like an animal, right? A savage. So I think there's all these little subtle nuances in this action film, which makes it remarkable, because it's an action movie, but there are some deep themes in there. And I'm actually quite impressed at how these themes are prevalent in a movie that's like literally 85% action, right? I mean, I've never seen anything like it before. So as soon as Max gets that damn thing off his face, we're back into another chase scene. And here comes Immortan Joe trying to catch up to Furiosa as she is betrayed by the, I guess you want to say, the other tribe that she made some sort of deal with, right? But as soon as they see that Immortan Joe is on her ass, they're like, forget it. We're not gonna sell Immortan Joe out. We thought this thing would be smaller in scale, but we see that he has a whole army behind him. Forget it. So they betray her, and then once again we hit the ground running, and Furiosa and Max and the brides have to get away. But during their escape, Immortan Joe's favorite bride gets killed. And I thought this was amazing. As far as taking a risk, seeing that George Miller was willing to kill off one of the main protagonists shows that he was willing to take a risk, right? Because you see so many of these movies and nobody dies, nobody's at risk, there's no threat, you know, the protagonists are going to live and see another day. But when we see this bride get killed, essentially ran over by like a monster truck, we know that nobody's safe in this movie. Any one of these protagonists can be killed, right? And Immortan Joe's shocked. Everybody's shocked that she died. And even the audience was shocked, right? Now, prior to this bride's death, the Nicholas Hoult character, who, I still don't even know this guy's name, and I don't really care because he was the weakest out of the three protagonists. And like I said in the introduction, I was kind of on board with his character. It was interesting up until the moment where he just becomes easily trusted by the brides and Furiosa. So this part in the movie is the peak of me being interested in him, where he tries to impress Immortan Joe by getting the bride back, and then he fails miserably, right? He just literally like falls on his ass, right? The bride dies. He can never go back. He's a failure. And I was, okay, this is interesting, but then the bride's Furiosa and even Max trust him way too easily, right? And then boom, that was the end of me giving a crap about this character, right? So I really don't care what his name is. He's easily the only bad thing in this movie, right? But I just had to mention that. Another thing that I have to mention is that Immortan Joe finds out that he was going to have a son and that, quote unquote, he was perfect in every way. So I feel like they're trying to convey to the audience that even though Immortan Joe has all these children because he's just using women as sexual slaves and to impregnate them and all that stuff, that they get born with disabilities, right? And deformities, right? And that this child maybe would have been a healthy one, right? No disabilities, no deformities. So this obviously enrages Immortan Joe. And then we have a sequence where there's some kind of symbolism in the sequence where that takes place at night in the middle of the desert or the wasteland. And Max and Furiosa and the brides get stuck in their 18-wheeler or whatever you want to call it. And they have to use this dead tree in order to escape, in order to get out of the pit that they're in or whatever, right? And for me, the symbolism is this. That tree represents life, right? And even though life on this planet is dying, its roots are still strong, right? And these roots the represent hope, right? And Max is able to tie the 18-wheeler to this tree and is able to use this. It's like seeing this tree is like a miracle, right? Since everything is just desert now, right? And it just represents hope to me, right? And even though there's barely little hope, barely little life in this movie, in this environment that they live in, that you still have to cling on to it. Just like the roots of the tree are clinging to the dirt or whatever, the sands, right? Because that's the only way that you can actually move forward and persevere, right? I may be reading too much into it, but hey, that's just me. That's what I took away from the scene. So ultimately, Max is able to aid Furiosa in their escape, and this is another sequence where Furiosa and the brides see that Max is willing to sacrifice himself, right? For complete strangers, essentially. He goes and is able to get another steering wheel for the 18-wheeler so they can get going. And then that's when Furiosa and the brides find out that the green place, which was their initial destination, which they thought would be a refuge, a paradise, something, is completely gone, right? It's just completely been wiped out as a result of the environment, the desert, the apocalypse, whatever. It just does not exist any longer. And Furiosa feels self-defeated, and she feels hopeless, and she attempts one last desperate act with the brides, which is basically just drive 200 miles in some ambiguous direction and pray that they come across some kind of vegetation or water or resources so they can live. And this is where we get to the heart of the film, where Max is like, look, there's nothing wrong with hope, right? But hope without action is meaningless, right? And that's when Max suggests to go back to the Citadel, which is Immortan Joe's stronghold, where they got the water, vegetation, food, everything. Go back there and take over that place, right? That is your only hope. And you need to do this. This is the choice you should make over some, I guess you want to say, wishful thinking that if you head 150 miles in some ambiguous direction that you'll come across water or resources. This is the plan you got to take. And like I said in the introduction, I love that message because it's not necessarily against the concept of hope, but it's practical. It's a practicality kind of thing. It's like, look, there's nothing wrong with hope, but you got to take action. You got to also have a clear plan. And Max was right. And that's what leads us on this last act and this epic car chase battle where Immortan Joe's gang and Max and Furiosa and the brides are both trying to get to the Citadel. Who's going to get there first? And we got some epic action, especially with the V8 Interceptor, which I thought was insane, man. The way that these villains are on the hood of the V8 Interceptor and just spitting gasoline directly into the engine. I mean, I just couldn't help but just feel like a kid, man. Just smiling with glee, just like, what? This is crazy. I mean, it's beautiful, right? It's beautiful. It was the perfect nod to fans and just the perfect cranking up of the insanity and the high octane action that I've been craving ever since I saw The Road Warrior, right? So ultimately what happens is Immortan Joe gets killed, right? Furiosa barely is able to survive with her life, right? They get to the Citadel first, and Furiosa's on the brink of death, but Max is able to bring her back, right? He's able to heal her wounds, right? He knows some kind of surgical procedures and stuff, or whatever you want to say, and he's able to save her. And then that's when he tells her his name, because initially he didn't want to tell anybody his name, right? He was like, what does it matter? But now he tells them his name, and you can see rather, such appreciation in the eyes of Furiosa, right? And that's kind of how the film ends. You see that look that Furiosa is giving Max, and it just feels so satisfying, right? That's why I don't understand how people could say that, oh, this movie's all about Furiosa and Max plays second fiddle to her. Dude, that look that she gives Max is one of gratitude, man. Deep gratitude, right? And it's for Max, man, the star of this franchise, right? And I felt that, right? I really did. And Max, this film ends just like the other previous two, with Max just kind of like, not literally, but just kind of like in a thematic sense. He's like riding into the sunset, right? He helped these people, and he's just riding into the sunset, into the unknown. And he's just that mysterious road warrior, man. You know, the hero, right? And I love it, man. This movie is great. The only thing I didn't like I said, like truly didn't like, was just the subplot with Nicholas Holt's character. But other than that, this movie is outstanding. I give it an A-. I highly recommend it. High octane action. So this concludes my review of the Mad Max series, right? And if you have to check out a Mad Max movie, check out 2 and 4. Check out Mad Max The Road Warrior and Mad Max Fury Road. And if you love those movies, check out Mad Max 1, and just keep in mind that it's a low budget independent film. Don't expect it to be this epic spectacle like Mad Max 2 and 4 are. And if you like the first one, check out Mad Max 3. It's not a terrible movie. It tries to be different. I think the greatest sin that movie committed was that it just didn't have the high octane car chases, man. It kind of lacked in the action department, right? But it's not a terrible movie. So that being said, that concludes my review and analysis of Mad Max Fury Road. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share. One love, people, and take care.